Going to work every day in order to make a living and support your family is part of life, but it doesn't mean you should be treated like a slave. Work conditions should be safe and you should be fairly compensated for your time and expertise. After all, the only reason the company is making money is due to the efforts of their workforce. Many employers throughout the world understand the value of their employees and ensure their staff are rewarded for their dedication. Sometimes, though, the man at the top doesn't want to share. By the early 20th century, coal had taken over from gold and silver as Colorado's primary asset. Not only did it help expedite their coal mining capabilities and the construction of their railroads, but coal was also responsible for heating hundreds of homes across the state through crisp Colorado winters. There were a handful of big operators that controlled the coal operations in Colorado, with the largest two being Colorado Fuel and Iron and the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company. For workers laboring in the mines, the job was difficult and dangerous. Even though there had already been decades of labor activism leading up to the Colorado coal strike in 1927, little had been done to improve the conditions. If the miners wanted to keep their jobs, they had to endure shifts of up to 12 hours per day with one rest day per week. It was backbreaking, to say the least. The hardships didn't stop once the laborers got out of the mines or finally called it quits. The countless hours of breathing in coal dust led to a disease known as black lung. It had first been described in 1831 by Dr. James Crawford Gregory, who discovered the phenomenon in a deceased coal miner. Today, we have medications that can help ease the symptoms, but even then, there's no cure for black lung disease. It was just another thing these miners had to contend with to put food on the table. If it wasn't lung disease or severe back issues, the miners were at constant risk of death or injury from collapsing or flooding mine shafts. After a spate of incidents in the mines, workers began talking about unionizing. They wanted better working conditions and were tired of putting their lives on the line to make a living. Roughly a decade earlier in Ludlow, Colorado, miners had been striking for the same reasons. They were represented by the United Mine Workers of America. The UMWA had been unsuccessful in negotiating with the mining companies, and on April 20, 1914, Colorado Fuel and Iron's private guards and the Colorado National Guard attacked a colony of striking miners and their families. 21 people, which included not only miners but their wives and children, died that day. You can learn more about that incident by watching our video titled Coal Mine Carnage by clicking the link above and in the description. Since the UMWA had substantially reined back its influence in Colorado, a more radicalized union stepped forward and took its place, the Industrial Workers of the World. The members of the IWW were known as Wobblies, and they exclusively believed in communism being the way forward for the United States. The Wobblies' bold claims on communism drew national media attention to their activism, but none of it was positive. At the time, state officials viewed that sort of talk as unwelcome, and in 1919, IWW leader William Haywood and other high-level union members were imprisoned. That didn't stop the IWW, though. Other leaders simply stepped up into the necessary positions. The events that led up to the Columbine Mine massacre began in 1927 with a seemingly unrelated event when 2 Italian immigrants were wrongfully executed in Massachusetts. Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti had moved to the United States in the early 1900s, where they quickly found themselves involved in labor unions and anarchist activity. In 1920, the pair were arrested on murder charges. The trial that followed was filled with controversy, with some believing the prosecution had a strong bias against the men for their Italian heritage and political beliefs. Even though the evidence against the men was circumstantial at best, Nicola and Bartolomeo were found guilty of the murder and sentenced to death. Despite desperate appeals to save the men, they were executed on August 23, 1927. Their deaths deeply angered the IWW, who urged the Colorado coal miners to go on strike in response to the executions. That didn't take much convincing since tensions amongst the miners had long been bubbling just below the surface. Roughly 10,000 miners listened to the IWW and walked out of the mines, downing their tools and refusing to work for the day. To try to stop the movement in its tracks, the main mining companies, Colorado Fuel and Iron and the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company, immediately fired some of the workers and closed down their common meeting grounds, but that failed to have any effect on the impending strike. Just over a week later, in early September, IWW leaders met in southern Colorado and created a list of demands for the strike based on requests from the miners themselves. They included an increased wage from $6 to $7.50 a day, among other grievances like union checkweight men who were responsible for verifying the amount of coal each miner brought out being officially employed. The strike officially began in October, and it saw around 8,400 miners walking out across Colorado. Naturally, that majorly slowed down production. Governor William H. Adams declared the strike as illegal, refusing to acknowledge the IWW as an official union. While numerous mines across Colorado were forced to halt, the Columbine mine was able to stay in operation after they hired 150 strikebreakers. That mine was owned by the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company and had been opened for 8 years prior. It quickly became one of the most prolific mines in the state, consistently producing Colorado's highest monthly yields by the early 1920s. However, that also meant the level of injuries and accidents at Columbine Mine was higher than anywhere else in the state as well. As the strike continued, tensions were quickly rising, and the strikebreakers were not thought of fondly by the rest of the miners trying to fight for a better future. To avoid their mine being compromised by strikers or the union, the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company had their armed guards turn the mine's town Serene into a makeshift secured camp surrounded by barbed wire and gated off from outsiders. While they fortified Serene, the IWW was focused on recruiting as many additional miners as they could. They did so by sending supporters of the cause to mines across Colorado, where they would sing "Solidarity Forever," the IWW anthem. The song goes, "When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong." Up until mid-November, Serene had been mainly left out of the strike, but things changed on the 14th when hundreds of miners and their wives arrived at the town for a demonstration. They waved flags and sang songs in an effort to boost morale and also tempt any other miners who had yet to join the strike. The strikers then headed off without incident and moved on to Boulder County. With winter fast approaching and Colorado's coal running dangerously low, the situation was escalating quickly. On November 21st, the strikers returned to Serene. There were around 500 of them and their wives and family members. They intended on getting to Columbine Mine and preventing the strikebreakers from working. The strikers knew they had the power with winter approaching, and if they could get everyone behind them, they believed their demands would be met. When the strikers arrived at the gates, they were met by the armed guards and the Colorado State Police, who had arrived at the town on the request of the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company and the instruction of Governor Adams. When the strikers arrived, Colorado State Police leader Louis Scherf told them to stop in their tracks. IWW leader Adam Bell was with the strikers and he approached the gate and requested it to be unlocked. Adam was ignored and hit with a wooden club, and the teenage boy next to him had his American flag ripped from his hands. After that act of aggression, the strikers moved forward, with some attempting to climb the gate. From there, all hell broke loose. The Colorado State Police members began launching tear gas canisters into the crowd, with one woman even being struck by one as she turned to get away. A fight then broke out between strikers and state police, but for now it only involved rocks, their fists, and a few knives. The strikers had purposefully left all of their firearms behind as they had no desire for bloodshed that day. Members of the state police began falling back and then opened fire on the crowd. 2 men were killed at the site, while 4 others died later due to their wounds. Over 20 other men and women were injured, including several guards who had been caught in the crossfire. The men who died that day were John Eastonez, Nick Spanidakis, Renee Jacques, Frank Kovich, Mike Vidovich, and Jerry Davis. After that devastating event, the strike lost momentum, but outbursts and conflicts continued until it was finally called off in May of 1928. That year, Josephine Roche took over the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company from her father and quickly instituted a $7 wage. She also officially recognized the United Mine Workers of America as the company's union. Despite the lives lost and the desperate efforts from the strikers, and it's important to mention Josephine Roche's part in raising the wages, working conditions remained mostly the same. The IWW fell out of favor with Colorado workers due to the failure to accomplish the strike requests, and no one was ever held responsible for the 6 deaths that occurred at the Columbine mine. To this day, the massacre stands as a reminder of what workers went through to fight for the rights we have today. Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and hit like, rate it, or leave a comment. Join us next week when we'll take you somewhere sinister.